what we were told about slavery in New York was that we freed our slaves very early. There was very little slavery here. It was like as if it was like the utopia free North. And it couldn't be any further from the truth. We were one of the largest slaveholding northern states. Brooklyn had the largest amount of slaves. I wanted to do a series that talked about the history of New York, slavery specifically, and women, myself. It was kind of, autobiographical, and that I'm a native New Yorker. I would go to all these places, different sites in New York City's 5 boroughs and Long Island, and really bring that history to life, the spaces that enslaved people worked. So it was like houses, the early Dutch houses, it was plantations, it was even places where they were sold, like on Wall Street, slave markets. But it also encompassed free African Americans, like Seneca Village. It also included some of the sites of the Lenape Indians, like Brawl Hall, and on Shelter Island, where also First Nation people and African people were enslaved and worked. What I'm reclaiming with my work in the White Shoes series is the anonymous men and women and children who were sacrificed, really, in the building of New York City and of this nation, and who made America just literally by their bodies and labor a superpower. And I feel a debt to these people and my people. They're our ancestors, literally. I feel like we owe it to them and to us to acknowledge what has happened here on this earth, in this city. By doing that, we say their name, we say where they lived and died and buried and worked. I feel like it's kind of to ignore them, to ignore that history and contribution is a kind of violence on the soul. We are at the Lefferts House in Prospect Park, Brooklyn. And the Lefferts House was key on my list because, one, I grew up living near the Lefferts House and seeing it, on my way home all the time. But once I learned the history of the Lefferts family, who were some of the largest slaveholders in New York City, that history just tied right in. Like, how did I not know that, and grew up living near here, like decades. And I figured that so many others had not known that. Isabel is an enslaved person, belonged to the Lefferts family. Don't know anything about her other than that she exists and her name. I also connect a series of women in my family who were all domestics. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, and of course my great-great-grandmother who was enslaved, Dido. They were all domestics. And so I linked that history, my own personal history, and then this house and Isabel as a circle of women, American women who have nurtured and cared for not only their own children, but white children whose families they worked for or were enslaved under. I feel strongly that a kind of reconciliation should have occurred after the Civil War. The trauma that slavery has impacted on generations is still with us. And for me, this was my way of trying to repair that in some kind of way, even if it was just for myself. This project, White Shoes, has been my therapy in a way that I have been able to go to these sites and mourn, but also take joy and pleasure that I am a free woman, and I am free because of their efforts and their resistance. And also, it's kind of a message to future generations as well, to acknowledge the past, know your history, and then you can go forward, like doing anything you want. Because I feel like knowledge is power. Knowledge is absolutely power. I find hope still in people. Human beings have this incredible, great capacity for not only hope, but understanding. I think you see it every day. I think in America right now, at the moment, yes, there's definitely a lot of strife and pain, and there may be more are coming, but there are people who I think mostly want to just be free and be happy. And they want to live their lives in peace. They want to understand one another. So I think that's the power of art. That's the power of our humanity, and our connection to one another. Because without each other, like we need one another, so much to exist and to make it.